Torej, lepo pozdravljeni vsi na današnjem humanističnem razgovoru oziroma razgovoru, ki nosi naslov humanistika v razgovoru. Ideja za ta večer je šla ob priložnosti gostovanja dveh dragih prijateljev, profesorjev na Arizona State University oziroma v okviru na Barrett, ki deluje v okviru Arizona State University. Torej profesor dr. Diane Gruber, amerikanistke in kulturne zgodovinarke, in profesorja dr. Ramseya Erica Ramseya, filozofa in komunikologa. Nekako izhajajoč iz zanimanj, s katerimi se vsi trije nekako, ali si neposredno ali posredno teoretično ali tudi praktično ukvarjamo, je šla ta zamisel za pogovor na temo vprašanja sodobne, ne samo sodobne, vprašanja umetnosti v sodobnem svetu. Jaz se največje zahvaljujem posvetili, je kot vedno Janko, ki je praviči, da je kot vedno pripravljal vsi takšne pogovore. To je za začetek, preden seveda pogovor potekal v angleškem jeziku in vsi ste tudi vabili, da sodelujete, če bi bila kakšna težava pri prevajanju ali pa s kakšnimi vprašanji, glede postavljanja vprašanj, lahko tudi v slovenskem jeziku, pa bomo tisti, ki bomo pač vsi poskušali nekako preskočiti na pomoč pri prevajanju. Seveda ste vsi vabljeni, da sodelujete v tem pogovoru. Pravzaprav to je poglavitni namen, da nekako vsi ob neki skupni temi pridemo v razgovor. Za začetek naj najprej predstavim svoja gosta. Oba, kot rečeno, sta profesorja na Arizona State University. Dr. Diane Gruber, poleg svojega predavateljskega dela, se opravlja tudi, to je zdaj morda nekako težko prevesti v slovenščino, ampak lahko bi rekli nekakšnega strokovnega odličja po tega, čemu Američani rečejo docent po Phoenix Art Museum. Skratka, ona ima tudi neposredno opravka z obiskovalci, ki si pridejo pogledati umetnine, ki jih imajo, ki jih oni postavljajo na svojih razstavah. Dr. Ramseya Erica Ramseya pa se predvsem ukvarja z vprašanji filozofije in komunikologije, pri čemer je, recimo temu, tako reklo, njegove izhodišče je kontinentalna, to, čemu Američani reče kontinentalna filozofija, oziroma natančneje zlasti hermeneutična tradicija, pa tudi pač elementi kritične teorije. Bom jaz zdaj prešel v angleščino, zato da lahko nekako poskusim pogovor speljati. Torej še pač So I would like to welcome you. Just go to English and never mind my stuttering, it's just the way that I am. So the idea for this conversation came out of, not only out of the interest that the three of us share, or the expertise with which we are dealing with, but also from, on the one hand, from all the conversation that started in Phoenix in November last year, my wife Alinka Kojila and myself visited Barrett College in Phoenix and presented the lectures, and there already we started the conversation about, in a sense, about the topic that has been set for this evening. So the question of cosmopolitanism. So, however, and then when we were in Phoenix, we also visited a wonderful exhibition that was presented at the Heard Museum. That is one of the major museums for Native American art, for indigenous art. And there was an excellent exhibit entitled Yuwa, Henri Matisse and the Inner Arctic Spirit, about the way the Inuit masks influenced, how they influenced Matisse's painting. And of course, it would be somewhat strange if we would debate an exhibition that only a few of us have seen. But it gave me since we had also a talk in Phoenix about the questions of cosmopolitanism, I wanted to combine the two topics, the question of art and the question of cosmopolitanism. How do they come together, if they come together? And I intentionally wrote the title of today's evening in Slovenian language and in English language, and using for the Slovenian version not the word cosmopolitism, which would be the translation of cosmopolitanism, but Svetovljanskost, in order to stress this worldly dimension of art, the ability of art to disclose the world in which we live in. And it seems to me that in this disclosing of the world in which we live in, is that dimension where also such intercultural conversations, such as Matisse's conversation with Inuit art, can come to fore. So that is, in a sense, it is a cosmopolitan conversation that comes to be in a work of art, but it is cosmopolitan only. No, maybe that's a strong word, but it is cosmopolitan insofar as it discloses the world in which we live. So, from different perspectives, that artists come together, and of course, such a presentation as this specific one that we saw in Phoenix, involving a lot of work by the curators who went in search to find the actual object that influenced Matisse, and even they went even further to find at least the names and perhaps the photographs of the artists, which were not the artists in our sense, because they were shamans who made those artifacts, which were not intended to be art, but they were used with religious purposes. And so, on the one hand, we have this immense work by the curators of the exhibition, and on the other hand, just today we visited, that might be a bit more tangible, since we're here in Ljubljana and the Ljubljana Biennial has just opened. We visited a couple of exhibitions presented there, where I think you can see the other side of this world, really, in a sense. This really cosmopolitan, and again, the question, again, you can see the importance of the curators, but in a completely different manner. And in a way you see, well, for me at least, and of course that was just the first visit and the first, sort of worldlessness of the art that we saw. Even if it takes the most concrete, like the imams giving sermons on language, but it's still, with its bare presentation of what it is, it's sort of worldless for me. So maybe just before, these are some of the questions that we've been discussing in these days while during your visit here. But as I said, the conversations coming from much farther place, and I think it's going to also continue. I think that would be the hope. But just maybe for that was sort of like what I just tried to outline, sort of the in a sense a biographical or the occasional moment for this conversation, but it gives us maybe the starting point where we can try to enter the questions of the worldliness of art, or the cosmopolitan dimension, which has, of course, in this, especially in contemporary world, has also the aspects of the world art market and all the things that are, wherein one would seem that the work of art is becoming, and that's the question, what the work of art within the world of contemporary art, within the workings of the contemporary museum and gallery system, which of course has to do something also with the questions of capital. So it was my hope, my modest hope, that we could start this. Just my modest thought that coming from very perhaps also personal experiences that we had with works of art, and trying to somehow get to grips with what is happening when one observes a work of art. And here, I think, last year in Krakow, we went where we met at the international summer school that was organized by the International Institute for Hermeneutics. You both gave papers precisely to the question, to those questions. Not only in Krakow, but also here in Ljubljana. I think you both spoke about how to approach art, and I think that would be the starting point. Maybe, Ramsey, you did more of a, it's hard to say.
It's not a slur.
Yeah, theoretical approach, yeah. But Diane, also coming from her experience as a docent, is also can also share with us perhaps some of the more practical questions that involve this, what I would hope to be the topic of tonight, but what I would hope to be that was something that would inspire conversation. So first, perhaps maybe you can do the first line, and of course everyone is, I think, invited to participate in the conversation.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you for being here. I love this opening that Dr. Vucic just made. So I would just like to contribute a few conceptual ideas that I've been using to try to think about how much the cosmopolitan means to me, and how much I am hopeful the way I've been trying to think about art will allow me to say something about who we are, and in doing so, allow us then to use the way we dialogue with art, to use that as a way to educate ourselves about how we might dialogue with the other, because the cosmopolitan is going to require some kind of conversation among difference. And in that light, then, I want to try to draw a few distinctions. And the first one is to try to draw a distinction between being close to art and being close to others, and being near to art and near to others. So for me, being close, I think we're close to art all the time, in the sense that that's just how it would be measured with a meter stick, right? That would be closeness, right? But nearness is something that can only be achieved meaningfully, it seems to me, and therefore calls on Dasein, or calls on human being, to have a sense of being what most discourse calls open to the work of art. But it's this word open that I wanted to try to come up with a synonym that might have some more, not insight, but at least would have some more turns of phrases in it that might give us a way to say, I can draw near to the art that way, I can understand how to draw near to art that way better than if I just talk about openness. So I want to try to see if we can overcome just being close to things by being near them, which I want us to understand as being meaningfully in a relationship with them. And so the word I chose in English was yielding. I want to know if we can yield to the work of art. And so I might just read one paragraph of this document on which I'm working for Phenomena magazine. All right? I want yielding to be a way that recognizes both our agency and our having to be both patient and agent. We're both active and passive before the work of art. So I don't want openness just being overwhelmed by the work, but I want yielding to have some bit of work by the viewer left for him or for them. So this understanding of yielding, for me, has a keen sense of surrender and giving up in it, from which I do not want to shy away. But this surrender is not a loss of agency, I want to argue, nor does it mark the end of the game, that I just yield and give up. Indeed, I want the opposite to be so, that the play of art commences with our yielding to it. So that's one of my claims, that the art, we make ourselves ready for the address of art by yielding to it. And then what gets surrendered and given up is our desire to control the work from the standpoint of mere calculation, of knowing exactly what the art means, of trying to find just one meaning for it, and so on. So, when yielding in this way, then we will give in to the attraction of the drawing addressed to art. We will give way to art's proper way of being, and we will give up our desire to challenge forth the work of art. I think if we're able to do that, then the play of the dialogue between ourselves and art has a chance to take shape. So these givings, on my account, will usher in what I want to call a readiness for the to and fro conversation that we can have with art. So I'm hopeful that in a hermeneutic way, we will understand that one of the ways we yield is by giving up some of what Gadamer calls our prejudices about art, but we can only give up one prejudice by replacing it, if you will, with another. So I want to try to see if we can cultivate a prejudice in favor of yielding to the work of art, in the hope that in that prejudice we'll have a real dialogue with art, so that it might show us that we are the beings who can draw near to things in meaningful relations. So when Gadamer says a piece of art tells us something about our own being, it seems to me that's what it has to tell us, that we are these meaning-making creatures who can draw near to things meaningfully and not just be next to them, not just catalog them, not just see them as if we're on a scavenger hunt through great museums of Europe where we say, now I've seen that painting, and now I've seen this painting, and so on. And I fear what we're doing in just wanting to get close to things and getting caught up in the commercialization of the cosmopolitan. What I fear is that we're devouring our own abilities, and therefore ourselves, at being able to draw near to things. And if we can't draw near, then I don't think we can know how to draw near the other or welcome the other, which it seems to me a cosmopolitanism is going to have to do. So I would end my little opening then with just bringing to mind the painting by Goya, one of his black paintings, Saturn devouring his children. There's something about that painting that when I'm with it, it tells me too much about the world, though I love it for just that reason. I don't know if I'm Saturn or the child being devoured. I don't know how to make that work. I don't know how to understand the depth and the mutilation of the body still being held, how deep the fingers are into the spine. But I also don't know what to make of this look in Saturn's face, which is if he knows better but does so anyway. And this is one of the things that I think art can help ask these kinds of questions and allow us to draw near to art in the hope that we'll learn to draw near in relation to one another. Is that enough?
Yeah, thank you very much for your let's say, opening remarks. I think you have outlined the questions that are encountered in a very apt manner. The way the encounter with the work of art as a work that harbors meaning, but comes to be, and maybe on the other hand, Diane can give us some insight how, with your work as a docent, but also as someone who attempts to theoretically describe what you're doing, when you encounter the very practical aspects of how this, when you bring, let's say, a group of visitors in front of a painting, how this conversation, how this coming to be in front of a work of art takes place, and how it can become a meaningful experience for someone who may have never been to a museum and may never go again. Of course, in the hope that they will return, because you never know.
Yeah, if I can sort of orient a little bit the context I come out of as a university educator in the United States, and then also an educator at the Art Museum in a state, we're at Arizona State University, which is in Arizona, which has an extremely underfunded public education system. And we have a lot of students who, if they come to the Art Museum, that might be their only time coming to the Art Museum on a class trip. In other parts of the United States, this sort of cultural habit of going to the ballet, going to museums, going to the symphony, that's fairly well established. But in a newer city like Phoenix, we don't have that tradition. And so odds are good that when people come into the Art Museum, that isn't something they do habitually. That our students might come to the Art Museum twice in the 12 years that they're in public school. So we're in a situation where we are trying to let them have as amazing an experience as possible in the hope that they will come back, because odds are good that their families won't bring them back unless they go home and tell their parents that they had a good visit. So, and then as someone who teaches, who uses art, not in an art history program, but in a communication program, there's an enormous amount of suspicion on the part of the students and the museum visitors. There's an incredible, almost reluctant, you can see people hanging back as they come through the museum doors. They don't lean forward into the experience, they're reluctant, and you have to sort of reach out and invite them into the museum. Students cross their arms in front of them and armor themselves. So the question I'm continually faced with is, and what's this expression you want to use? It's a yielding. The situation I'm continually faced with is that I believe that a powerful piece of art can provide a remarkably powerful experience for the viewer, one that they can't get in other situations. So I think the work of art always has that incredible capacity, but when you read Gadamer, or when you read any of a series of other art or aesthetic theoreticians, you come away with the idea that if you just plant people in front of the piece, I don't know what it does, some sort of magic upon them, that they'll just quite naturally, without any sort of facilitation or assistance, have this sort of overwhelming experience. And I don't believe that's true. So a large part of what I find myself trying to do is create situations for people who don't often encounter art to get over their suspicions, to get over their reluctance, to get over their sense that the job of the educator is to wrap up for them in a nice, neat bow the meaning of the work of art and sort of hand it over to them, and then take them to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one, giving them little information packets all the way through the museum. So an enormous amount of what I spend my time trying to think of is, how do you create educational situations and experiences that allow people to have the powerful experience that I believe works of art actually do provide for them. But how do you cultivate the ground? How do you create the situation in which this yielding can happen? So that's a large part of what I find myself doing and facing. And I was thinking also of the wonderful tour you gave us the other night of the hostel. Can I open it up and ask a question outside of us for just a second? Do you find that people experience the space of the hostel in the manner in which you've intended, in the manner in which you've designed it? Or does it sort of naturally happen for them? Does it happen after you explain all of the architectural and design, incredibly thoughtful design decisions that went into it? Is it happening a little bit and then you come and you explain it to them and then it becomes a fuller experience of the space? Or is this not?
I think that explanation is not necessary, and they really understand intuitively the space which is opened. But explanation can add then, and can give a deeper option, and that this is really very, how can I say, extra done. Okay, here is Vesna Karmel, she is from the beginning in the process too, she is art historian, and we work together on the project. So for us was a surprise that people really take it immediately, intuitively, like a whole, and then they really ask for explanations. We have a lot of these tours through. People always wait, they want to see other rooms and so on. But for us was a challenge and experiment that art has a strength to turn such a strange, dark space, which is really with a full historical weight, without losing this contact with history. For us was this the main challenge.
So people sense something when they come into the space.
Yes, I think that this counterpoint is still in the building. The building is still heavy, and it needs a cultural flux through that this is in balance. It needs this cultural that it's not necessary, but it's fine if it happens.
If it happens.
So we still didn't make a book about it, but we will prepare it later.
Do you think one of the things that keeps cosmopolitanism from being what we might want is also what keeps us from being able to draw near the work of art, is we think of art as an object and we're a subject standing before it, and that we don't already share a world with it?
Yeah.
Does that seem right to you? And so the yielding that I want to see it's a move that the interpreter makes, but that also announces him, her, their self as the being of the there, where a world is disclosed. And that's one of the things I think every painting would teach us if we let the address of art do what the address of art does. But my experience of watching, before I don't know, learned how to address painting, or hear their address, or converse with their address, they seem like broken objects, because in most of our everyday life, when we encounter an object, we ask what it's for, right? What can I do with this? But when the painting is hanging there, it doesn't answer that question very well. And if that's our most habitual question, then that's the question we have to overcome. But I think that's the question of a more utilitarian using subject with a world full of objects. So we have to let it be what you might call a thing or an object in the sense that it starts disclosing itself to us. Does that seem right to you in your understanding? From your opening too.
Yeah, I wanted to come back a little on the question on the notion of yielding. It seems to me that the way you both describe also the theoretical and the practical aspect of it, that there is some sort of resistance of art at work here, and it's in a specific sense it is a double resistance. It's the resistance of a work of art to start to speak, and the resistance of the spectator to the work of art. And this double resistance needs to be or has to be overcome in order for the world that is, even though the worldless world that we encounter all over the museums and galleries of today's, of the modern world, is still a world, if only a world per negationem, so by its own emptiness, but still, there is this sort of resistance that, and maybe that could be the I don't know, I'm just trying to probing into that direction. If overcoming that double resistance, so it's come in a sense of a coming together in a conversation that doesn't just happen, but it has already always happened. In this coming together of the two sides, if there are two sides, which there would be no, that's what I think, that's what I agree with you. There would be no two sides. There would be an abyss between the spectator and the work of art, and there would be nothing. And perhaps maybe this is what we encounter today in the muteness of what we saw today. But maybe in this overcoming of the resistance comes that maybe you try to discuss or indicate by the word nearness that allows us a sort of to stand, a resistance of the stance in front of the work of art. But maybe just that might be a point of clarification also for us, since I know your use of the word yielding and yield, and maybe just to in your initial outline of the word, you mainly, in a sense, stress the subjective part of it, that we need to surrender. I know that for
you have others, yes.
You have other, and I think that this is important for us maybe to be aware that yielding does not only mean to back up. Yielding, or a yield is also something that is given unto us.
Yes.
From precisely this sense of, and
Should I say briefly about these yields? So in English we have the phrase, I yield the floor, which means I've made a little part of the dialogue, but now I stand aside, but I don't leave the conversation. I yield the floor to listen to what comes next. That's the sense. Then the last sense of yield, the one you're getting at, is this notion of a harvest. So we call what the autumn harvest brings in the yield from that field, or the yield from those trees, or the yield of that vine. And it's important to me that that yield be taken away from the museum and from the work of art, because I think that matters to the one who went there. And it matters then to the next situation where they're in relation with another human being, where they might have to yield to that other human being for a real kind of humanistic dialogue to take place. Is that what?
Yeah.
Is that part of it? And so I'm not one who wants to leave aside that we might take something from the museum. Indeed, I want that yield to come from the yielding that I'm talking about from the standpoint of the viewer.
so in speaking of in achieving this kind of a yield, if what I described is sort of also a part of the overcoming of the double resistance, maybe Diane, you could tell us about a bit more, also from the very concrete situation of a docent trying to
Yeah, this is what I spoke about with the museum educators earlier this week. There's been a move in the United States, and maybe there has been elsewhere, I'm only familiar, in terms of museum education, to move away from this sort of older, what they call professorial model, where the docent has a series of pre-planned lectures, information capsules, and you probably do 12 works of art in a 1-hour tour, so you're almost on a marathon. You're running from work to work, and the docent gives you a little mini lecture at each one, and then everybody leaves feeling that they got their price of admission. It costs $20 to come into the museum, you've got 12 works of art, you can sort of figure out $1.25 per work of art or something like that. And the feeling was that that was replicating types of leisure experiences that you could get in many other realms. You could go to a baseball game, you could go to an outdoor concert, and that the museum was simply becoming one more place that you paid for admission and you got something you felt you could kind of put in your pocket and leave. And we were saying about 10-15 years ago in the United States, this movement began in museum education to say, how could we radically slow down the amount of time visitors were spending in front of each work of art? How could the docent move from that classic notion of docent as teacher to docent as facilitator? That your job was simply, again, to kind of create this experience and this space where people could begin a conversation with the work of art, where they could make observations, where they could ask questions, where they wouldn't be made to feel stupid for asking those types of questions. Because maybe in the art museum, more than almost any other cultural realm I can think of, my students often tell me there's a sense that everybody there already knows what you're supposed to know. And everybody there already understands everything you're supposed to know. And so to not also stroke your chin and nod your head knowingly is to set yourself out as uneducated or illiterate or stupid. So a large part of this change in museum education was about making people feel that you could safely ask questions, that you weren't exposing yourself as ignorant by asking questions. So what we tend to do now in the museum is, as the facilitator, you are as knowledgeable about the work of art as you would be in the old professorial model. You have to have done all your homework and you need to know the dates and the connections and where we are in art history and the medium, and you still need to know all of that. But you sort of keep it in reserve. And then you ask people to simply spend some time with the piece. 3-4 minutes, where people are just very quietly looking at the piece and making observations, and then you open up the conversation. What are people noticing? What kinds of questions do people have? And now your job as the educator becomes this sort of both a facilitation of the conversation and then a weaving in of the relevant information to the piece as it emerges in the course of the conversation. So when it goes well, it's a very, if I can use the word, organic process, and a great deal of the information you have may never get shared because the conversation hasn't gone off on that particular path. And so you just think, wow, I did all that research. Maybe the next time I hold a conversation, I'll get to sort of talk about these aspects of it. When it goes well, it's very organic, and people report. They'll say things like, I've never had that kind of experience in an art museum. I've never had that kind of experience with a work of art. And they hopefully find it pleasurable and they want to come back and do it. When it goes poorly, it becomes a pretend version of that conversation. So I've got all my information and I know what interpretation I want the visitors to make of it. And so I seemingly ask questions, but they're really just hoop jumping questions. They're not really productive questions. And I keep asking for people's answers until I get the one I want. And that allows me to then sort of continue my lesson that I'm teaching. So when it goes poorly, it goes very poorly. And it would be better to go back to the old professorial model and just be honest with a group of visitors that you have a lesson and an interpretation, and it's the only one they should take away. You should just do that. So it takes a few years, I would argue, of practice to become skilled at holding this kind of, creating this kind of space where a visitor or a viewer actually feels that they can yield into the painting. Because the other way it can go very badly is people begin to trust you and they take you at face value when you say we're actually having an investigation, an inquiry about this work of art. And then at the end of it, you do something where you say, well, thanks for playing, but the real interpretation of this work of art was X. And now I think you've created a violence on the viewer because they've come into the space, they've trusted you, they're yielding as you, they're vulnerable to the work of art, and then all of a sudden it turns out it was just this was just a dressed up version of what they think art is. Anyhow, the expert comes in and tells you what it means. And yeah, so when it goes poor, it goes very poorly. I've gotten off topic.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay. But so for me, at a very, very, very practical level, that's what opening up space so people can experience power of a work of art. That's one of the ways it happens at a very practical, hands-on level.
Just trying to sew together the threads of our conversation so far. And it seems to me that there a parallel could be drawn between what both of you are saying. If on the one hand, let's see if I can manage to express this the way I'm trying to think it. If on the one hand a conversation in front of a work of art can go either way, in the good and the bad direction, and it seems to me that there is this parallel that could be drawn with this, in a sense, with the system of the museum, with the global system of the museums and galleries, and what we call amongst ourselves called that cosmopolitism. And on the other hand, the disclosure of the world within a work of art that would have its correlation in the good conversation, and this disclosure of the world, which allows for the differences of the world and the identities of the world, the different identities, all the differences that come up, be disclosed as they are, not as they. Because yes, if you see the art world, it's what you were describing with the stroking of the beard and standing smart and measuring with your eye, which we all do, of course. So we're all a part of this cosmopolitan. I mean, the ones who go to museums, probably, and also, and on the other hand, where in a sense the encounter with a work of art makes you stop, if only for a while. But so I don't know. Maybe I think do you see did I describe the parallel somewhat? I mean,
yeah, I'll just be very starry-eyed right now. I'll be very idealistic. So there's the interview that Gadamer does towards the end of his life, and he says, what is the function of the work of art? What's the power of the work of art? And he goes into a conversation about how we're also caught inside of our own religious backgrounds. We're all caught inside of our cultural backgrounds. And he says the challenge we face in the 21st century, and he's talking in the 20th century, the challenge we face is how will we have those discussions across these sort of incredible differences that we have. And then very optimistically, he says, I think the work of art, I think the phrase he uses is strengthens our resolve, that the work of art, spending time with the work of art can give us practice, it can strengthen our critical ability to have a conversation with many different voices from many different traditions. And I take him to also think that that's a translatable skill from the museum out into the larger world, out into the larger cosmopolitan conversations we need to have. Is that too starry-eyed? Is that too optimistic? Can teaching people to have a conversation with a work of art translate into how they deal with a person who's different from themselves when they leave the art museum?
I think if you can teach them about understanding, yes, that can happen. If the painting teaches us that we are being in the world, then I think it's possible. If it teaches us only to know it was painted in 37,
but I don't speak very good English. That's a new position in the art.
Yes.
Today you must educate audience for the music.
Yes.
That's strange. Because I teach in the school and I have some impression, I have some, how to say, skúšno,
Post-Slovenian experience.
Experience, yes.
Yes, yes.
Stayed in secondary school, and we went this week to see a movie of Truffaut.
Yes. Yes.
And wow, no.
Yeah.
It was a lady there which wanted to educate them, and they said, "What kind of movie was that?" Oh, it was a white-black movie. Oh, yeah, it's very difficult to break the aversion about to the art, to the people, because perhaps in your museum they come willingly, how to say, but I bring them to the no. It's better, and we spend a lot of time to make atmosphere, to sensibilize them. Impossible. That's the first question. The second question is, if I go to the museum here is a museum of modern art, I need explanation.
Yeah.
It's impossible to make experience because I don't know. That's a video, and I need explanation. I must read what the artist wants to. That's not so.
That's actually not art.
Yeah, because.
It's not art, actually.
Yeah, it's art. It's sometimes
It's just a joke.
No, but
because
yeah.
Years ago I translated some Gadamer. He said, if something listen Bach, if I'm a composer or I'm worker, or physical worker, it comes to me. But today visual art, it's sometimes very difficult to come to me, to
you
counter the spectator and the work of art.
You put your finger on two things. One is generational, and I share this. I taught a class last year on world cinema. Same thing. We tried to do Truffaut, Godard, and I got them along, and then I did Ozu's Tokyo Story, and I had a riot, just a rebellion on
it was Tokyo Story.
Oh, it was 2.5 hours long, and just and so there is for me, there's something. Well, I'm becoming older as an educator, so I'm always trying to figure out, am I getting less patient and crabbier, more persnickety as I get older, or is there something generationally very different? Because 20 years ago, I could create the space, give some context, give some hints on how to watch, and they would settle down. That's a very caretaker thing. They would settle down and they would watch the film. As my students get younger, I find there are fewer and fewer films or pieces of art that even if I lay the groundwork, they will have the patience to sit for. So that's the first thing you put your finger on. Are we getting into some generational difference that has something to do, I know we talk all the time about attention span. So I want them to slow down in the art museum. Maybe they want to do 20 pieces in 20 minutes, maybe just, and take their phones and so that 20 separate Instagram posts, with 20 different, who wants to sit in front of one thing for 15 or 20 minutes. So that's the first, it's generational. The second thing you put your finger on, and this is something that concerns me as well, is that as contemporary art becomes increasingly conceptual, I find I have to spend more time with the wall didactic than I do with the actual piece of art. And I'm noticing that more and more, and now I don't know is how effective a work of, how effective a piece of work is it if I need a full wall of didactic explanation?
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah, that's what you say, no.
No, I understand that, but that's not because of the artist. No? You have plenty of the artists, but you have, what was better, king or Gustav?
I'm sorry, say it
What
again.
is better, king or now museum Gustav? We say manager. Curative. So you curative. Because nowadays this art become very aggressive, very ideological also. There are plenty of artists. They paint, they make the paintings, they make the sculptures, but the institution make the agenda for what is good. It's very funny just to say it because he mentions the art museum next by here. It was for me very funny experience when I came inside. It was kind of steal something, and I got a touch a little, and they told me, "Don't touch it."
Don't touch it.
So I know that this is art.
It's the thing you can't. It's the thing you can't touch. So that becomes interesting. If we're hoping that the work of art opens up a practice space for holding conversations that you then take outside, but if the institution is seeking the most cryptic, difficult, conceptually abstract pieces, now that lessens the number of pieces that you can have that conversation in front of.
I know a lot of people, they make good paintings,
Yeah.
and good sculptures, and they also make good music, But if you want to get on the yellow pages, you can throw stones, you have to do something, I don't know, critical, extreme, or stupid, or, but this is not because, perhaps this is cosmopolitan, perhaps this is worldwide ideology, I don't know, but it's just mainstream. So the institutions are closed, not the people.
Yes.
I cannot imagine, in the Middle Age, that the people didn't understand the Gothic architecture.
Or the icon.
Because it's a part of the culture.
Or the icon, or the altar, or the religious painting. Yeah, it made sense as a part of the culture.
That's something from right.
Because the Foundation Bouton in Paris, the new one, is almost the same museum as the new one in the Metz. How to call it? Pompidou. It's the same. It's not the same architecture, but it's the same concept. You enter inside, it's the same paintings, the same concept, but it's actually boring. Actually, it's boring,
Well, I think what was in the notes, what I tried, or in the invitation, what I tried to address with saying that the world market of gap museums and gallery systems is the cosmopolitan in the, let's say, bad manner. kitsch manner, that would be, and what would that say of the world in which we live in? That if, I think what we took from today when we visited, I don't know if that will change with thinking about it, but somehow I doubt it. But is this terrible this terrible muteness that you encounter in most of the, I mean, a lot of the institutions with so-called contemporary or modern art, which doesn't mean that you cannot find in them a work of art that addresses you. That is by no means, but predominantly it's, I don't know, for me, that's my experience. But but what does that say of the world in which we live? That would be the question. If this so-called bad cosmopolitan, where has taken a hold of all the, I mean, taking into account that the museums and galleries are also institutions of preservation. What are they preserving for us now? Because sometimes they seem to be empty cans of katere.
Yes.
Can we say that what we used to share as a world, in a sense, has become so crumbled, so fragmented that it has to be, in a sense, manifested in its emptiness of meaning?
So for you today, what was disclosed is the fragmentation of the world, in a
Yeah.
certain sense.
Yeah,
Yes.
If you're going through an exhibit of things, even though the exhibition, with all the curator work that you can clearly sense with the logos and the texts that are over there, and you can sense that they're trying to make a story out of something but still, you still go from one work to the other, and it's.
Is there a way to connect this to the students not liking the film? In the sense that one of the things I thought I was trying to say today as I stood before every piece was, I want to understand. Right? I want to understand. And I think the students, they saw something and they trust you, so they think, certainly there must be something, right? But I missed it. And today I wasn't so sure that I missed it. I just think it wasn't quite there, all right? Or I got it, forgive me, in some pieces so quickly that I thought, okay, next, right, or something. I like the pieces that I say to my students, let's talk ourselves into this painting. Right? Not talking ourselves into liking it, but let's talk until we get into it. So that's, I think, I've learned from your strategy of letting them be free enough to say, even to say just what they see. So it seems to me you can talk yourself into a painting and then start to discover yourself as this being whose being is having to understand. And I think when our understanding is risked or offered, and we don't get in return the same kind of concern for understanding, that's a painful kind of disjunct. Your story reminds me, my favorite professor told me to go see Weekend by Jean-Luc Godard. And I didn't know what I was seeing other than I was seeing cannibalism and revolution and slaughtering of pigs and everything that's in that film in a 7-minute panning shot of a traffic accident or a traffic jam. But because he was the one who recommended it, I thought I was at fault and not the artist. And it seems the generational change might be is that the one who didn't make it easily accessible is the one to blame, not the one who didn't get it. Does that strike anyone as a description of the contemporary moment?
You've lost the authority that you would have had previously. Because what your professor said to you is something along the lines of smart people have seen this film. And that was a good enough reason to go and watch it, even if you didn't fully understand it.
Well, since I wasn't, but wanted to be, whatever that, I'm still not, but yeah.
Or something along the lines of educated people have seen this.
Anyone in this room whom I trust said smart people will see this film. I was going to see that at home. So.
How to come to contact with the modern art, and people who will not to see art. I don't know if you know, in Germany was Max Indal. He wanted to educate in modern abstract art, not in the conceptual art. The workers in the Volkswagen factory. In Slovenia is such. It was impossible. How he wants to workers, but why it's why we need education? What's in art that we need education in art? Because in Greece it was not. I don't know. It was need for education. Right? Sure. In modern art, and you must be prepared to be open for that.
Yeah.
But why? In Greece, it was important. I'm here, that's art. It was. It was. Neki samo umeli, mislim, neki gradili to be educated.
I guess that's sort of what Kadam also somewhere says, that the shared world after the bourgeoisie has crumbled, and the works of art now they create their own communities. So maybe a side note here, that would be the thing, since, as you can see, I'm not really impressed by what we saw today. But that doesn't mean that other people cannot be impressed.
Where do you are?
At the biennial of Uganda.
No.
We saw the main exhibitions of the biennial, and that doesn't mean that if I speak of the muted spaces of museums or the wordlessness, that doesn't mean that this wordlessness is something that everyone has to experience. And that perhaps this attempt to bring art to workers. Yeah.
Okay, I think that people need art, but they don't know that they need art. And we rethink this from the opposite side. So we invite them in hostel, but we throw them in art directly and in jail in the same time. And this is a shock, deep enough that it functions. And I think that people now, because they are too much in spectacles, need such inside shocks, and that we should not offer them directly. Art is very important and so on, but we need to prepare a surprise for them and invite them not with targeting, but with frame, such a subtle frame where they can be aware that here is something not just special, but something what is not ordinary. And for us was a surprise, because people always say when you are building this, you are crazy, originals in the rooms of hostel. It's completely. One class of maturans will destroy everything. This was all the time. But first 6 years, nobody take no original art piece. But we have very small inside, everybody will be able to put it in the... So, if people are surprised, if something is opened to them, even a child, they really can recognize this. And they help, this invite them in communication.
And I do think that impulse or that suspicion, the suspicion that something awaits people in the art museum is,
yes.
I think that's an actual thing. I mean, the number of people who come through the doors of art museums, oddly enough in the United States, the numbers are rising, which is very strange, but then when you observe people as they move through the art museum, and of course they actually do this with stopwatches, most people spend between 17 to 25 seconds in front of a work of art. And if you observe people, there's almost a sort of like they come up to the piece and they wait and nothing happens and they go to the next one. But that they come in, right? And then that they come in, I take it that there is an impulse, that they come in seeking something they suspect is there. And I like your suggestion that we do what? We jolt them, we surprise them when they get there. Because of course it won't work on the front end to say, come to the art museum, it's good for you. It's like cod liver oil, right? Nobody wants.
Don't go to the museum.
Don't go, whatever you do, don't come to the art museum. There's nothing good happening here, it's a secret. It's a sort of secret club.
Yeah, but wouldn't, if you go for the, if not a doctrine of the shock, then you make it a doctrine of the surprise, or a strategy of surprise, that as soon as it becomes a strategy, it also becomes its own downfall, because then people, it can be something, in my opinion, can it be something that can be sort of premeditated in the sense that it was meant for it to happen that way? Or is it something that just happens, or it does not happen organically? That's what I mean, organic. That's a strong word.
Spontaneous.
Yeah. So I think as soon as you postulate it as something, it can become its own, it can...
I'd like to say something.
Yeah.
Man,
Yes.
it's about explanation to the arts, you know. As being also an artist and a teacher, I've experienced this for a long time. And I find it that, let's say, a consumer, whether is a child or a grown-up, whatever, would approach something, of course, he's needed to be educated with basics, to understand, for instance, abstract art, let's say music, which is not harmonic anymore. And it goes the same with the rest of the arts, also poetry and whatever, you know. It's just that, let's say, maybe it's also a bit of getting older and having this gap, generation gap. But it's also the new generation that's coming up with the smartphones and Word. When my smartphone changes the word in my message, you know, and then I say, oh gosh, I didn't mean that, and I send it already, you know? And it's a disaster, you know? And what I was trying to say that approaching to the abstract art, you know, let's say that mostly, as I was speaking about the basics, you know, that mostly abstract art speaks for itself and for the educated, or let's say for the specialists who understand this and take it as a novum, something new that would change the world, whatever, you know. It's just that the point is that now I'm coming to the point that this art today, nowadays, needs so much explanation in words that is quite boring, because the art itself should speak. And I believe in phenomenological way of approach, that one should come and say, okay, I got 20 pictures to see, 20 minutes, okay, let's have half an hour, but please come back to one of them and get into it. Yeah. And you may choose it by yourself, or maybe I influenced whatever, as a teacher or whatever. It's just that I don't agree that, especially he mentioned like institutions who measure what is art and what is not, whether you're going to get support or sponsors or whatever. So a rich man, a director of a company, whatever, understanding some new art will, of course, listen to the specialists, to the professors and the curators in the gallery, whatever, to get the opinion, because they're not educated and they are afraid to spend too much money on something that is not worth it, you know. So what is, I'm not against the explanations in words, but as I find it, it's more and more dependent on that. And this is wrong. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have that. And this suggestion you make for the education, we've just started doing something. We do it with the teenagers, and they come to the museum, and we know we're never going to get them to put their cell phones away. So we sort of say, here's this gallery. Here's generally what's happening in this gallery. Go find a piece that speaks to you, or that captures your attention, or that does something, and then we're trying to take pictures of it. Do something other than, you can take a selfie, but also take pictures. What details, what sort of captures your attention, and then trying to have them, they won't talk to us, because we're the old fuddy-duddies, but they'll talk to each other. So we've started trying to give them just enough critical vocabulary. And then it has more of this feeling of, I curated my own visit to the art museum. I chose the pieces that were, and we're having a little bit of success with a little bit, but it's based on your idea. It's very much based on your idea.
I just want to add that it's too late. We must start in the primary school. It's really too late, because it's very important for the child. I'm sure that they accept some forms and to transform, to make time to this process, to grow with with pictures or images, and because when they are teenagers, they're more intellectual oriented to this problem, not so much organic or with intuition and with the body. So I think it's very important for this education in the primary or even in the pre-primary age. And of course, you can't take children to contemporary music, contemporary art in such a way that it's not make contact on this bodily or sensitive level. So it's very important that the child get the art which is which is in a way classical.
Yes.
Not to accept it intellectually, but to make contact which is primal on this bodily basis. I think it's one of the most important, and also the place. Jan mentioned this when we talk about when we do this in ex-prison. The place is very important to make all the connections to be orientated in place, to make relative distinct relations with everything what's happening outside. So this in place and this classical or the bodily contact is for me very important.
Yeah, I know, I agree. Part of the uphill battle we have in Arizona is as they continue to cut programming from the school system, it's always the arts that go first.
It's the same.
It's the same here. And so trying to create those spaces where they actually can even make art, which was just an understood part of the curriculum when I was growing up, and then you complemented it with the art history. We're even trying to still preserve space for them to just make art at the elementary school level. It's maybe too late all the way around.
Can I just ask you, did you say we educate children to contemporary?
No, I think it's not. You haven't done nothing. I think it's not. No, not to take a lot of exhibitions are even very problematic for the children.
Yeah.
But I think that if you, of course, there are some exhibitions which are also because the function of art is really important these days, and because most of art is made for the museums, for the contemporary museums, because they are. I thought it's like two different levels. One is the art for the museum, and one is the art for the people. Because it's important, it's very difficult to buy even the work of contemporary art. So,
But wouldn't that just questioning you? Doesn't that sort of not? Doesn't that sort of hypothesize that the prejudice that, in the sense that what we see in contemporary art is something you can appreciate when you're older. First, I don't disagree, of course, but in the other sense, what is going on today in the museums of contemporary is what is going on today with our world. And maybe there would be, I know, who are, maybe I'm just being, no, I'm at a loss because here you're sort of making choices in advance for someone else, and of course that is a part of education, of course. But I mean, drawing such a strong line, I don't know, could also be going in the opposite direction, in the sense of making that part of art and perpetuating this bad kind of cosmopolitism, making it just something that some specific, especially trained people can understand.
I wanted to help you, but you are the right way, because I can't talk because I have a little boy. I would rather not have education on art in the primary school.
Why?
I would like more creativity. I forbid all the crocheting, as we say. My first system that they heard, and it's wrong, completely wrong.
So you could,
Rather less and more creativity. So that's the question: how to achieve that? But because the educational system is very big, it's impossible to have a good teachers in this part.
But I think that's the problem of our
Not just
Slovenian
the same all over.
educational system, because as I understand you, I'm very interested in your position of the docent.
docent, yes.
Yes, that's very interesting. But in our, we are our educated.
It's not just our. It's
Pupils are, kako bi rekel, imajo neko vrsto odpora.
So you're so you could have two problems. You could have my problem where they don't teach any kind of art in the school,
Yes.
or your problem where they're teaching art
Utilization.
inappropriately.
Not improper, very, not classical way, against creativity and against, it's just everybody the same, let's paint the window, okay, let's paint the window, nice.
Truly cultivating creativity, we would see that art at the end
Yes,
in the art museum,
yeah,
instead of what we're seeing now.
that's what we see. Because everything, then if you don't have creativity, everything should be taught, you have learned everything.
Yeah.
But it's part of the process. With creativity, you get the result by yourself, unconsciously, perhaps. But in the kindergarten and the school, kindergarten it's better, even better.
Okay.
And the school is more like, mythologically.
Yeah, that is one of the problems of the school. They sort of do sort of dual. On the one hand, they're molding the young generations, but what are they molding for and how are they molding for? They are, on the other hand, they're also responsible to the, let's say, responsible to the state and other higher, and that is, I guess, the question. And I think that's something also you both very much, as educators, are often, I guess, aware of, and also in your day-to-day work as professors. Then maybe that would be one of the questions. How in a, of course, there's a difference being a professor or a teacher at lower levels of education and higher levels. But still, when you see all the new faces, the unmolded, the impressionable youngsters coming, there is this huge amount of responsibility, and I think it could be, okay, roughly it could be said that the system that we in Slovenia went through is more or less a professorial system, not a system that would allow for much participation of the students in the development of how things are discussed, or it would be just professor giving pills of knowledge to be more or less, like called liberal.
Good for you.
It's good for you, yeah. So maybe how do you in a sense sensitize the young generations that there is despite of everything, despite of all the, even that there is, even if you go see a bad exhibition, that it is worth going to go at least initially, just that there is something there that can be experienced, even if this is an experience of utter aversion, but even that is an experience.
I think part of what we're able to achieve in the Honors College is the way we try to welcome students from the start is one that is meant to have some overtly and obvious nurturing moments to it, so that we build up a kind of trust for the student. So by the time we have our first trip to the art museum, I make sure that all the other faculty also attend. So we participate with them in the event, rather than just saying it would be good for you, we're sending you, here's a free bus pass to the museum. So that's one of the things I think that helps quite a lot, is we're there with them from the start. And then we're there with them in the museum. And trying to use just the most subtle ways of questioning into a conversation where they then start to do the work, I think is one of the most important things that I've seen. And when I teach my art class, that's one of the things too, is I've been trying to use the strategy of getting out of the way of the work of art so that it can start to do what it can do. But I think that's part of what we're able to achieve in the Honors College. But I must admit, it's because we have 315 students, it's something we're allowed to do because of our size, but I think we should do it because of our size. And as we've been growing, we're going to have to invent other kinds of strategies or nuances to continue to be successful.
Well, and the students, I mean, this is where the two met. The students have been spending several months in this special seminar where we're reading world classics, and the whole model there is, what questions do you have, what interpretations are possible, rather than a more classic literature class where you would say, here's what Gilgamesh means, here's what Plato's Symposium means, right? So they've already gotten some little bit of exercise in the practice of doing interpretation. The problem though is they're terrified because they've just come through 12 years of public education where they had to memorize answers and regurgitate them on exams. And so for 12 years now they've been rewarded with, give me the interpretation, give me the answer, I'll get it back to you, and you'll give me an A. And so now we're trying to sort of change their comportment and get them to, again, start becoming comfortable with realizing the text is ambiguous, it has a number of possible interpretations. Not any interpretation. Not any interpretation. It's not some sort of ridiculous therapy session. No, it's not, you know. But that takes a lot of time to get them in the habit of doing that type of work, which they then hopefully take to the art museum.
And I think that coming to what has been said about creativity in art, that is a way of how to, for instance, to allow for creativity to evolve, but not be stifled by the mere sharing of knowledge, or if one could use harsher words. But on what is it? So, for allowing or enabling creativity to take flight, but not in the sense that it goes completely off the wall, that it still has some.
It still answers to the conversation we're in.
Yes.
Well, and it still is bounded by the work of art or by the text. I mean, there are models where you look at a painting or you read a poem, and whatever anybody thinks they feel about it, and then you just sort of do this generation, and there's 15 people in the class, and 15 different people say, I thought it meant this. and then you just let that sit. That's not, I'm not interested in. I still want it bound somehow by the actual work.
It has to be a conversation about
Something, right.
not just idle
No,
talk.
it can't just
Right,
be a
it can't be
series
idle
of
talk, that's right.
statements about
That's right.
something. It has to be a conversation with the piece of art and a conversation with the other people in the group. And it's in that conversation that the weighing of interpretations begins to happen. And the group sort of sifts down to some possible ones.
I think this is, I mean, of course, we are all invited to stay here and talk. And if there are any questions people would like to ask to our guests here, I mean, they could happily continue the conversation, but for this formal, informal part of the conversation, I think this is a lovely ending that was not sort of the final period, but 3 periods.
Yes,
yeah,
ellipses, yes.
and an ellipses and hyphen or whatever to this conversation. So I would truly like to thank you both for participating tonight with me in this. I think it was a thought-provoking conversation. Hopefully it was a thought-provoking conversation that will continue either today or in the days to come. And so thank you once again, Professor Dr. Diane Gruber, for your being here.